Welcome. Hey everyone. Welcome back to Civics for the Soul. Yes, I know I've been gone a minute. I had someone ask me today, they're like, where you been? I haven't seen you online. And I've just been going with the flow of things. Some days I'll have a chance to engage and some days I don't. But today I have a little bit of time. I got some notes. New shirt, new merch, uplift our communities. Make sure you go to Historically Aware to get that. So I wanted to make sure that I posted something in time for Resurrection Sunday or Happy Easter. For Christians who celebrate, it's Easter, and those of us call it Resurrection Sunday. And I wanted to do it because I've been thinking a lot about the concept of rebirth, of renewal, and how, you come out the box and you start something and it's just not right. And so you have to start again. And then of course, I'm reflecting a lot on the reason for this particular resurrection season, the Lenten season, and how people often have to go through a spiritual transformation and a rebirth. And that got me to thinking not just about what needs to happen in the Black community and how we probably need a rebirth right about now. We need to rethink what we're doing, why we're doing it. We need to rethink who we are, whose we are. Those are some questions we need to ask ourselves. But we also need to ask it in the context of being here and what we understand is the United States and what may possibly be a falling and crumbling empire, and whether this thing needed to fail, it needed to fall, and whether it needed to be born again. And I won't say whether I think it needs to be reborn again the same way, or maybe something new, or maybe not at all. I won't get into that, but there's certainly something to be said about there needing to be a renewal and a rebirth. So I've been thinking about that a lot and this rebirth concept. So I think about the founding of this country and this nation, which is really rooted in a rebellion to the British crown. And not only was it a rebellion, there was a certain commitment and a tethering to genocide and a criminal enterprise, basically. And the reason why I say that is it was tethered at the same time to the erasure and genocide of the indigenous. It was tethered to a global trafficking, which is a crime to traffic people, human trafficking ring from Africa. It was tethered to a welcoming of all of those folks out of the prisons of Europe, out of poverty in Europe. They welcomed them in. It was tethered to this sort of subjugation and this exploitation of people. And that's how it was born. And I'm not sure that if you're born out of that, if you don't really try to do things right, eventually that's going to crumble and fail, and it's going to be flawed, and it's going to need to die and possibly be reborn again. So I was thinking about this genocide and how there seems to be a recommitment to genocide. And I know we've been talking a lot about Palestine, and I have tremendous empathy for the people of Palestine. I really do. But what I take issue with, though, is the conversation around it as if it's the only genocide that is currently happening. We've been in the midst of a centuries old genocide of the indigenous and Black people here on these lands. It's been ongoing. It's not just one, right? It's not just Palestine, but there seems to be a recommitment to that. So when you see in the news how they're going to attack the Smithsonian for their wrongful ideology, which I don't even know what that is. But it's basically, we just don't want there to be any evidence of any Black anything, of the history of Black people here, other than the fact that we want to subjugate Black people. That is what, that's what they're trying to say, okay? So we see this sort of commitment to the erasure of Blackness, of Jackie Robinson, of the Tuskegee Airmen, of, as if they did not fly those planes. I don't know. We're seeing this commitment to that. We're seeing a continued erasure of the indigenous here. We're seeing, when I think about genocide, it's really characterized as a slow death. So it's not something that happens immediate. It doesn't even happen within the course of a year or two. When we speak about this genocide in Palestine, you know, genocide is a slow death that happens over decades, years, centuries. It's a slow erosion of the people's trust, their faith, their culture, their rituals, their values. That's what a genocide is. And so it really, it just gets on my nerves when people don't have the proper context around the genocide question. But there seems to be a commitment, a recommitment to genocide here in the United States and how they are choosing to erase history. No DEI, and DEI is supposed to just be a euphemism for black, basically. No blackness, okay, other than our violence against them and our subjugation of them, okay. There also appears to be a recommitment to the global trafficking experiment. So, you know, in recent news, there's a man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And so this man he was arrested without a warrant, no warrant for his arrest, and I don't know exactly who picked him up, if it was ICE or someone pretending to be ICE. So it was a warrantless arrest. They pick him up, put him on a plane, don't even bypass all due process, right? Put him on a plane, put him in El Salvador. Someone files, of course, a suit in the district court, and the government basically admits that, yes, it was wrongful, and no, we don't care. They're like, we just don't care. What they try to say after the fact is, yes, we did it. It was an administrative error. Sure. And we're not going to return him because we found out that he's a terrorist. Remember that. There's always this, you're hearing a lot about that terrorism, terroristic threats. You know, we hear about that in the context here in Atlanta with Cop City and the Cop Cities that are being built elsewhere. Terrorism. But they said that he's a terrorist. He said that he's not. So the United States Supreme Court, which is supposed to be the third branch of government that is supposed to be the check and balance, you know, there's supposed to be a checks and balances system under this government. They said, well, no, you need to return him because it was wrongful. You admit that it was wrongful, so you need to return him or facilitate his return. Government says, nah, we're not going to do that. He's there already, and he's not coming back. And everybody around there says we're not returning him. So what does that mean when you have when you don't have a check and balance? Because people are basically saying we don't care what you say. This is not this is basically an authoritarian regime. This is not a democratic republic. You don't have checks and balances. You don't have three branches of government. You only have one branch of government. And we've got the military behind us. And so we will do what we want and we will disregard whatever orders. What does that say about democracy? Is it even present now? I don't think it is. But I've been thinking a lot about that and this sort of commitment to all the things that did not make this place great, basically. It did not make this place great. This commitment to human trafficking, this commitment to genocide. And we should be concerned. It should be very concerned. Because this isn't, you know, and it's very easy for people to make this and say, oh, this is about the immigrants and they're trying to crack down on immigrants. This is all a ruse. This is a ruse. And I know that sometimes they'll put other people, other communities, other vulnerable groups in front, and you'll say, well, you know, this is happening to the immigrants too, or this is happening to the LGBT community too. This is a ruse. This is nothing but global anti-Blackness and a desire to put Black people, as I have said countless times before, to put Black people back under the threat of their violence and to subjugate them. This is always about putting us back on a plantation. I've said this as such. It's always about this. Make no mistake about it. This is how you know that that's what this is about. Other than the wanton disregard of the law, this is what they're doing. Okay. What they're saying is that with this guy, Abrego Garcia, they're saying, one, there is no law that we are bound to respect here. You know, we don't respect the Supreme Court. We don't respect authority. Where have you heard that from? Where did you get that from? There was an old court case that says something about the black man has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. We've heard that before. What they're doing is saying we have the right to disappear a person. We don't have to give them due process. We don't have to have probable cause. We don't have to have a warrant. We can disappear you. We can just take you off the street and we can put you somewhere else, in another place, another space, another country. That's what we're hearing now. But where have you heard this before? Y'all remember the slave catcher? Again, this is a ruse. This is all to get back to its foundational underpinnings. It's all to get back to where they started before, where a slave catcher could literally take a black person off of the street because they have no rights that a person is bound to, that a white man has to respect. And they can take them and they can ship them and put them back into slavery if they were walking around free. Doesn't matter. You have no rights that they are bound to respect. And your freedom papers aren't going to save you. The fact that you're a free person, and in this case, you know, being an American citizen is not going to save us. Now, I don't know about the citizenship status. I have to look it up to see the citizenship status of this man, Abrego Garcia. But what I do know is that our citizenship status that we got under the 14th Amendment is not going to be able to protect us. And the reason why is because they're tinkering with that. They're tinkering with this notion of birthright citizenship and whether it even applies. So the orange one that's in the Oval Office, after they shipped this man to El Salvador and said he's not coming back, he says, oh, the homegrowns are next. Something, let's see, what is it? Yeah, homegrowns are next, meaning he's perfectly willing and he's probably going to attempt, just as they attempted to do this, and so far they're getting away with it. They're attempting to ship U.S. citizens. It doesn't matter if you're a U.S. citizen. They have the right to ship a U.S. citizen and deport them abroad without any due process at all, which is you're supposed to have due process under the 14th Amendment, meaning you're supposed to have notice and an opportunity to be heard. They can't just ship you off and accuse you of being a criminal or a terrorist without you being able to go to court, to defend yourself, to hear the allegations against you and respond to those allegations. That's what's called due process under the 14th Amendment. But as I told you, these are not people who care about the Constitution. They care nothing about the 14th Amendment. I said this a long, long time ago. I said this person who is now in the Oval Office should have been automatically disqualified, not only as an insurrectionist, but just disqualified because they already told you that they're not going to uphold the Constitution. So none of this even matters. So whether the Supreme Court says something or not, it doesn't matter. Whether you have a 14th Amendment or not, it doesn't matter. If you have birthright citizenship. Now, 14th Amendment is very clear. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens. Supreme Court for well over a century has been very clear that if you are born in the United States, then you are in fact a citizen. I think it was when did they pass on this one? 1878. It's part of the Reconstruction Amendments. That's why they're so important to Black people, because this is how we became citizens. We were born into citizens in this reconstruction, this rebirth. We were born into it, so it's very important to us, but they care nothing about it. I promise you, they care nothing about it. They're basically saying, forget that. So my advice to us, if they're going to disregard the 14th Amendment and not give anyone due process, and they're going to go back to their slave catching ways, then it's gonna be very important for us to find maroon communities, and we need to go back, do some research on maroon communities and what that means, where we can go, what we can do. We need to make sure that we're traveling in numbers. We got to try to find a way to keep ourselves safe in the meantime. Our people have done this before, but we got to go back and reread and study and figure out how they were able to stay safe, particularly when the slave catchers are running after you. As it relates to the 13th Amendment. And remember, the 13th Amendment it says that slavery is abolished except for punishment of a crime. What does that mean? That's their caveat. So in terms of Abrego Garcia, if they can say that he's a terrorist, if they can say that he's a criminal, again, he can be a slave. That's what that means. Because they've never given up. They've never given up their commitment to enslaving people, and particularly enslaving Black people. They've never given that up. That's why they have that little caveat in the 13th Amendment. Where we need to be concerned is if we have people in our families and in our lives who are incarcerated, technically their status is that of a slave. Because again, slavery is prohibited except for punishment of a crime. When you are in the carceral state, if you are incarcerated, you're on probation, whatever it is, then they can treat you like a slave. And if you are a slave, then you cannot necessarily be a citizen. This is why the lawyers we're all up in arms, because we're very concerned about these interpretations under the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment. So what I suggest that we do, if you have family members, we need to start taking care of our folks, making sure we don't need any more new entrants into the prisons. Stay out of the prisons, stay out of the way to the extent that we can. Now, of course, they'll always try to come up with ways and invent laws that will apply to us, but try our best, stay out of the carceral state, try to get our folks out to the extent we can, because we need to be concerned about that, because they can just basically disappear you. They can snatch you up off the street, send you somewhere without due process. They can render you a slave, and they can put you back on plantations that we thought that they gave up long ago. Those are my thoughts. I know it's not positive. It wasn't very positive or rebirthy or renewal. It didn't give the feeling of new life. But what I will say is this: I think that unfortunately this process is necessary. It's necessary for our community, because we done forgot some things, and we need to refocus on some things. Our values. We need to focus on who we are, whose we are, how we got here, who we were before we got to these shores. We need to remember that. We need to go back and study. We need to lift up our people. We need to uplift our communities. We need to reclaim our minds. We're distracted. We're assimilated. We're distracted. We're colonized. We need to get back. We need a rebirth of sorts of our community, and I hope that we'll do that. Whether that happens to this country, I don't know. But I'm not necessarily committed to that either. I am committed to our rebirth. I'm committed to our liberation. So that's it. Happy Resurrection Sunday to those who celebrate, and I'll talk to y'all soon.